The relentless hum of the tires against the cracked asphalt had been Michael's only companion for what felt like an eternity. The digital clock on his dashboard bled a sickly green light, each passing minute an agonizing crawl towards a destination that now seemed impossibly distant. The highway, a black ribbon unspooling through the inky countryside, had long since shed any semblance of civilization. No streetlights pierced the oppressive darkness. No distant glow of farmhouses offered a comforting beacon. Just the unwavering beam of his headlights carving a temporary path through the thick, swirling fog that had begun to snake its tendrils across the road. A bone-deep weariness had settled in Michael's limbs, a heavy cloak woven from hours of relentless driving. His eyelids felt gritty, each blink lasting a fraction too long. He'd pushed himself, desperate to reach his grandmother's bedside before morning, ignoring the insistent whispers of fatigue. Now, the consequences of his stubbornness were starkly apparent. A sudden, violent shudder ran through his aging sedan, followed by a disconcerting thumping sound that resonated through the floorboards. He eased his foot off the accelerator, the car protesting with a series of jerky movements before sputtering to a halt on the shoulder of the deserted road. Cursing under his breath, Michael switched off the ignition. The sudden silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the wind through unseen trees and the rhythmic tick of the cooling engine. He fumbled for his phone, the screen illuminating his tired face. No signal. Of course. He was in the dead heart of nowhere. After a moment of frustrated contemplation, he decided to take a look. The fog, thick as pea soup, swirled around the car, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Armed with a weak flashlight, he trudged around the vehicle, the beam cutting a feeble swath through the gray miasma. He couldn't pinpoint the source of the trouble, but the ominous feeling in his gut told him it wasn't a simple flat tire. Just as despair began to gnaw at him, a faint yellowish glow pierced the fog in the distance. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered within him. It looked like lights. A building, perhaps? With renewed determination, he started walking towards the hazy illumination, the beam of his flashlight dancing nervously ahead. The fog seemed to grow denser with each step, muffling sounds and distorting shapes. It felt as if he were wading through a dream, the air heavy and still. Then, the indistinct glow resolved itself into a cluster of flickering lanterns, casting an eerie light on what appeared to be a small village, or perhaps just a very isolated roadside establishment. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The buildings were low and constructed from dark, weathered stone, their roofs moss-covered and sagging. A pervasive silence hung in the air, broken only by the crackling of the lanterns and the soft rustling of unseen things. As he approached, he noticed a small, open-fronted structure that seemed to be a tea stall. A single, elderly man sat behind a rough-hewn counter, his face obscured by shadow. The air carried the faint, sweet scent of spices. "Hello?" Michael called out, his voice sounding strangely loud in the stillness. The old man slowly raised his head. His eyes, when they finally met Michael's, were unsettlingly pale, almost translucent. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Lost, are you?" the old man rasped, his voice low and gravelly like stones grinding together. "My car broke down back on the highway," Michael explained, gesturing vaguely in the direction he had come from. "Is there anywhere around here I could get some help? Or perhaps a place to stay for the night?" The old man's gaze lingered on him for a moment too long, making Michael feel strangely exposed. Then, he nodded slowly. "The village offers what it can. Rest is possible. Help, perhaps." As Michael stepped closer, he noticed other figures emerging from the fog, their forms indistinct and shadowy. They moved with an unnerving quietness, their eyes fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their features sharp and angular, and they spoke in hushed whispers that he couldn't quite decipher. "Welcome, traveler," another voice said, soft as the rustle of dead leaves. A woman with long, dark hair that seemed to absorb the lantern light stepped forward. Her eyes, like the old man's, held a strange, unsettling quality. "You look weary." Michael felt a prickle of unease. There was something profoundly strange about these people, about this place. It felt out of time, disconnected from the world he knew. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled into somewhere he wasn't meant to be. "Thank you," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "If there's a place where I could spend the night, I'd be grateful." The villagers exchanged silent glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, the old man gestured towards a dark, squat building further into the village. "The old inn. It offers shelter." Michael followed the woman as she led him through the narrow, winding paths between the stone buildings. The fog swirled around them, obscuring the details of the village, lending it an air of mystery and menace. The silence was broken only by their footsteps and the occasional, hushed murmur of the other villagers, who seemed to melt back into the shadows as they passed. The inn was a dilapidated structure, its wooden door creaking ominously as the woman pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit by a single flickering lantern hanging from a low beam. The air inside was cold and musty, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic and unsettling. "There is a room for you," the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rest well." She led him to a small Spartan room with a narrow bed and a single, dusty window that looked out onto the swirling fog. As she left, the silence descended again, heavy and oppressive. Michael tried to relax, but a knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He lay on the hard mattress, the sounds of the village, the soft whispers, the occasional creak of wood, amplifying in the stillness. As the night deepened, strange things began to happen. He heard faint whispers just outside his door, too low to understand, yet undeniably present. He caught fleeting glimpses of figures moving in the shadows beyond his window, their forms indistinct and unsettlingly still. Once he thought he heard a child's faint weeping, quickly cut short. He tried to rationalize it, the exhaustion, the strange atmosphere, his own frayed nerves. But the feeling of unease persisted, growing stronger with each passing hour. Then came the conversations. He could hear the villagers talking amongst themselves, their voices a low, murmuring drone that seemed to permeate the very walls of the inn. Occasionally, a word or phrase would drift through, chilling him to the bone. "The time is near. He is the one. The cycle must be completed." Their words were cryptic, their tone laced with an ancient dread. He couldn't understand what they meant, but the implications sent shivers down his spine. They spoke of things he couldn't comprehend, of rituals and sacrifices, of a darkness that seemed to have clung to this place for centuries. He tried to leave. He crept to the door, his heart pounding in his chest, and peered out into the hallway. It was empty, shrouded in shadow. He moved towards the main entrance, his footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. But when he reached the door, he found it locked, the heavy wooden bolt firmly in place. Panic began to rise within him. He was trapped. Returning to his room, he pressed his ear against the thin walls, straining to understand the hushed conversations. He heard his own description whispered, his journey, his arrival. It was as if they had been expecting him. Slowly, a horrifying realization began to dawn. This village, it wasn't just isolated. It was something else entirely. The timeless atmosphere, the strange behavior of the villagers, the whispers, the shadows. It all pointed to something unnatural, something beyond the realm of the living. This wasn't a place on any map because it existed outside of the normal flow of time. A pocket of reality haunted by echoes of the past. He was in a ghost realm. The thought sent a wave of icy terror through him. These weren't ordinary people. They were specters, trapped in some endless loop, their existence tethered to this forgotten place. And somehow, inexplicably, he had stumbled into their domain. As the night reached its darkest hour, the whispers grew louder, closer. He could hear them just outside his door now, a chorus of hushed voices, chanting in a language he didn't understand, yet felt deep in his bones. Suddenly, his door creaked open. Standing in the doorway were the old man and the woman, their pale eyes glowing with an eerie light in the darkness. Behind them stood the other villagers, their gaunt faces illuminated by the flickering lantern light, their expressions a mixture of dread and a strange, unsettling anticipation. "The time has come," the old man rasped, his translucent eyes fixed on Michael. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped Michael. He backed away, stumbling against the bed. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The woman stepped forward, her dark eyes filled with a sorrowful intensity. "You are the one prophesied, the one who will finally break the cycle." "Cycle? What cycle?" Michael pleaded, his mind reeling. The old man's voice was heavy with the weight of centuries. "An ancient curse binds this village. A sacrifice is needed to appease the shadows that hold us here." Michael's blood ran cold. Sacrifice. He was the sacrifice. He tried to run, but the villagers were upon him in an instant, their touch icy and ethereal. He struggled, but their strength was unnatural, their grip like that of death itself. They dragged him from the room, down the creaking stairs, and out into the swirling, fog-choked village square. In the center of the square stood an ancient stone altar, its surface stained with dark, ominous markings. The villagers formed a circle around him, their faces pale and expectant in the flickering lantern light. The chanting grew louder, the air thick with an ancient, malevolent energy. He saw the glint of a ceremonial knife in the old man's hand, its blade long and wickedly sharp. Terror choked the scream in his throat. He was going to die here, in this forgotten place, a sacrifice to appease whatever dark entity held these spectral villagers captive. As the old man raised the knife, his eyes filled with a chilling mix of sorrow and grim determination. Michael saw a fleeting image in his mind. His grandmother waiting for him, her face etched with worry. He would never reach her. The last thing he saw was the descending blade, glinting in the lantern light, and the horrifying realization that he wasn't just a victim. He was a long-awaited participant in a ritual as old as the stones beneath his feet. The blade plunged down. A scream, silent and unheard in the swirling fog, died in his throat. The villagers sighed, a collective exhalation of centuries of trapped existence. The curse had claimed its due, and in the stillness that followed, as the fog began to dissipate, revealing the ghostly outlines of the village bathed in the pale light of the false dawn, a new figure emerged from the shadows, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. He looked around at the silent, spectral villagers, at the blood staining the ancient altar, and a chilling whisper echoed through the square, carried on the cold morning air. "My car, it broke down just back on the highway." The newly arrived man stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning terror. He recognized the scene before him with a sickening lurch in his stomach. The ancient stone altar, still faintly stained. The silent, watchful villagers, their spectral eyes fixed on him. And a cold dread that seeped into his very bones, a feeling of being caught in an inescapable nightmare. He vaguely remembered the jarring thump, the slow, agonizing descent into the fog-laden shoulder of the road, the lure of the distant, flickering lights, the unsettling welcome of the villagers, the oppressive atmosphere of the inn. Had it all been a dream? A horrifying hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But the chilling reality of the scene before him screamed otherwise. The air was heavy with a palpable sense of ancient sorrow and malevolence. The silence of the villagers was not peaceful. It was expectant, predatory. His gaze fell upon the old man, who now turned his translucent eyes towards him. There was no recognition in those pale depths, only the same unsettling stillness he had witnessed before. The woman with the long, dark hair also looked at him, her spectral face an echo of the sorrow he had seen earlier. A cold whisper brushed against his ear, seemingly carried on the stagnant air. It was a voice he didn't recognize, yet it resonated with a primal fear within him. Another one. He tried to speak, but his throat was constricted with terror. He wanted to scream, to run, but his limbs felt heavy and unresponsive, as if trapped in thick, viscous water. He was caught in the same terrifying loop, destined to repeat the same fatal journey. His mind raced, desperately trying to grasp the impossible reality of his situation. Had he somehow stepped outside of time? Was this village a place where lost souls were eternally ensnared? And why? Why was he here? His eyes darted around the village square, taking in the details he had missed in his initial weary arrival. The weathered stones of the building seemed to weep moisture. The lanterns flickered with an unnatural, unwavering light. There were no signs of life beyond the villagers themselves. No animals, no bird song, just an oppressive, timeless stillness. He noticed a small, crudely carved wooden sign hanging askew near the edge of the square. He squinted, trying to make out the faded letters in the dim light. The script was archaic, almost illegible, but one word stood out, chilling him to the core. Atonement. Atonement for what? What ancient sin had condemned this village to this spectral existence? And what role was he, a weary traveler who had simply taken a wrong turn, meant to play in their eternal torment? As if in answer to his unspoken questions, the villagers began to move towards him, their silent advance more terrifying than any scream. Their pale eyes held a strange mixture of dread and resignation, as if they were both the perpetrators and the victims of some ancient, unspeakable horror. He backed away, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stumbled over a loose stone, falling to the damp ground. The fog, which had briefly lifted, began to swirl again, enveloping the village in its ghostly embrace. He could hear the soft rustle of their movements as they closed in. their icy touch sending shivers down his spine. He closed his eyes, bracing for the inevitable, the horrifying echo of what had just transpired. But the touch never came. Instead, the whispering intensified, swirling around him like a suffocating shroud. He could almost make out individual words now, fragments of a forgotten language, tales of betrayal, sacrifice, and a darkness that had consumed this place centuries ago. He opened his eyes, and the scene had subtly shifted. The altar was no longer stained. The villagers stood motionless, their gazes distant and unfocused. The fog swirled around him, thicker than before, disorienting and isolating. He was no longer in the village square. He was back on the narrow, winding path leading towards it, the flickering lantern light still visible in the distance. The same faint, sweet scent of spices hung in the air. Disbelief warred with a growing sense of utter despair. Was he trapped in a loop, forced to relive his arrival, his brief respite, his horrifying demise, over and over again? He turned to flee, to run back into the suffocating fog, away from the beckoning lights of the village. But his legs felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. An unseen force seemed to be drawing him forward, a morbid curiosity mixed with a terrifying inevitability. He took a hesitant step, then another. The lure of the lights, the false promise of shelter and help, was too strong to resist. He was a moth drawn to a fatal flame, a lamb being led to the slaughter. As he approached the village again, the scene unfolded exactly as it had before. The old man by the tea stall, his pale eyes and unsettling smile. The silent villagers emerging from the fog. The woman with the long, dark hair, her voice like the rustle of dead leaves. This time, however, a flicker of recognition sparked in the woman's eyes as she looked at him. A fleeting expression of pity, perhaps even a silent plea. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the same vacant sorrow. He was led to the dilapidated inn, the musty air and the single flickering lantern casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He lay on the hard mattress, the whispers outside his door beginning sooner this time, the sense of dread already a heavy weight in his chest. The conversation started again, the hushed murmurs seeping through the thin walls, the cryptic phrases sending icy tendrils of fear through him. The time is near. He is the one, but this time, amidst the dread, a spark of defiance ignited within him. He wouldn't simply succumb to this horrifying fate. He had to understand. He had to find a way to break this cycle, not just for himself, but for the trapped souls of this cursed village. When the door creaked open again, and the old man and the woman stood in the doorway, their pale eyes glowing in the darkness, Michael did not back away in terror. Instead, he met their gaze, a desperate question in his own eyes. "Why?" he whispered, his voice hoarse but firm. "Why me?" The old man's translucent eyes seemed to cloud with an ancient sorrow. The curse. It demands a life for a life, a traveler, lost and weary, to take the place of one who was unjustly taken long ago. "But I'm just passing through," Michael pleaded. "I don't understand." The woman's voice was barely audible, a breath of despair. "The shadows, they do not care for understanding. Only for balance." As they dragged him towards the village square, towards the ancient stone altar, Michael's mind raced. He had to find something, anything, that could disrupt this ritual, break this endless cycle of death and despair. He looked at the faces of the villagers, their expressions a mixture of grim duty and silent suffering. Were they truly malevolent, or were they just as trapped as he was, forced to play their roles in this horrifying drama? As the old man raised a knife, its cold gleam reflecting the flickering lantern light, Michael focused all his will, all his desperation, into a single thought, a desperate plea directed not at his captors, but at the unseen forces that held this village in its grasp. "Let it end!" he cried out, his voice raw with terror and a sudden surge of defiance. "Let us all be free." His words hung in the air, swallowed by the swirling fog. The old man hesitated, his hand trembling slightly. A ripple seemed to pass through the assembled villagers, a flicker of something akin to hope in their spectral eyes. Then, a gust of wind swept through the square, extinguishing the lanterns and plunging the village into absolute darkness. A chorus of whispers erupted, no longer hushed and mournful, but sharp and agitated. Michael felt a searing pain in his chest, a cold, agonizing emptiness spreading through his limbs. He gasped, his vision blurring. He could feel his life force draining away, the ancient curse claiming its due. But amidst the dying light and the chaotic whispers, something shifted. The icy grip of the villagers loosened. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to lessen, as if a great weight had been lifted. As darkness consumed him, he heard a final whisper, close to his ear, a voice filled with a sorrowful gratitude. "Thank you." Then there was nothing. The fog in the village began to dissipate, revealing the spectral figures of the villagers, no longer frozen in their cycle of dread, but fading, their forms becoming translucent, like smoke dissolving in the morning air. The ancient stone altar crumbled into dust. The dilapidated building shimmered and dissolved into nothingness. The village was gone. On the deserted highway shoulder, where Michael's car had stalled, the fog slowly lifted with the first rays of dawn. There was no sign of the village, no trace of the tea stall or the inn. Just the cracked asphalt and the whispering wind. Inside the car, slumped against the steering wheel, Michael was gone. But a faint whisper, carried on the morning breeze, seemed to echo across the empty highway, a chilling reminder of the night's horrors. He's still here. The rising sun cast long, distorted shadows across the deserted highway. A lone crow perched on the roof of Michael's abandoned car, its beady eyes surveying the empty landscape. The air was still, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the unseen trees. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last vestiges of the morning fog. No other cars passed. The stretch of highway seemed to exist in its own isolated pocket of reality. Then a figure emerged from the distant haze, walking slowly along the shoulder of the road. It was a woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide and filled with a profound sadness. She wore simple, old-fashioned clothes that seemed out of place in the modern world. As she drew closer to Michael's car, her gaze fell upon it, and a flicker of something akin to recognition crossed her face. She stopped, her expression a mixture of sorrow and a lingering sense of fear. She reached out a hesitant hand towards the car door, her touch seeming to pass right through the cold metal. A soft sigh escaped her lips, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. "He is still bound," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle breeze. "The cycle, it is not truly broken." She walked past the car, her spectral form shimmering in the sunlight, and continued down the empty highway, disappearing into the heat haze as if she were a mirage. Later that day, another car finally approached. A young couple, on their way to a weekend getaway, spotted Michael's vehicle and pulled over with concern. "Hey, are you all right?" the young man called out, approaching the car cautiously. He peered inside and recoiled in shock. Michael sat slumped in the driver's seat, his eyes wide and staring, his face frozen in a mask of silent terror. There was no sign of injury, no indication of what had caused his death. It was as if he had simply stopped living. The couple called the authorities, their voices filled with a nervous tremor as they described the unsettling scene. When the police arrived, they were baffled. There were no skid marks, no signs of a struggle. The car itself seemed to be in working order, the flat tire from Michael's memory nowhere to be found. The medical examiner's report was inconclusive. No apparent cause of death could be determined. It was as if Michael's life force had simply vanished. The case remained unsolved, another tragic mystery on a lonely stretch of rural highway. The locals whispered stories of strange occurrences in the area, tales of a village that appeared and disappeared with the fog, a place haunted by restless spirits. But these were dismissed as folklore, the product of overactive imaginations. Weeks turned into months. Michael's car was eventually towed away, another forgotten relic on the side of the road. The highway returned to its usual quiet solitude, but for those who were sensitive to such things, a subtle shift had occurred in that particular stretch of road. A cold spot lingered in the air, a faint sense of unease that prickled the skin. And on particularly foggy nights, some travelers reported seeing a faint yellowish glow in the distance, a fleeting glimpse of something that shouldn't be there. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whispered through the empty fields, a faint, almost imperceptible voice could be heard, a chilling echo carried on the breeze. He's still here. The curse of the forgotten village was not broken. It had merely found a new anchor, a new victim to perpetuate its endless cycle of despair. Michael, the weary traveler who had sought only a moment's respite, was now an unwilling resident, his silent terror woven into the very fabric of that haunted place. He was trapped, not in a physical sense, but in a spectral echo of his final moments, forever reliving his arrival, his fear, and his ultimate demise. He was the new silent resident of the village that wasn't on any map, his spectral presence, a chilling testament to the ancient curse that held it bound. And on foggy nights, if you listen closely enough, you might just hear his silent scream carried on the wind, a horrifying reminder that some journeys have no return, and some places never truly let you leave. The highway remained empty, waiting for its next unsuspecting traveler. The cycle continued. unseen, unheard by the oblivious world, a silent testament to the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. And somewhere in that spectral village, Michael remained, forever lost, forever terrified, a permanent fixture in a ghost story that never truly ended.